Mr. Yo, I have a problem, and I'm very pleased to have you because I think you can help. So at UOB, I'm an asset allocator. I spend a lot of time thinking about where the economic trajectory is going and interest rates are going and how we should allocate assets around the world. But I was very influenced by a book. It was by Barton Biggs, a famous investor, and he wrote this book called Wealth, War, and Wisdom. And he said asset allocators like me have become overly complacent in this post-World War II environment where we think we can just invest by looking at interest rates and GDP and so forth. And he said before World War II, the geopolitical tensions had a much bigger effect on asset allocation around the world. Knowing what was happening to currencies and the assets in these countries, where these tensions were going on and who the winners and losers were particularly significant. So I've had this bias in recent years when investors ask me about geopolitics. I do point out, in the last 50 years, there's really been very few geopolitical events that have disrupted asset allocation. But I think I may be underestimating this, and I'm hoping to have your guidance now on some of the great tensions that are going on. And I think it's great to have you because I think of you as one of the thought leaders in probably what's going to be the most important geopolitical tension in the years to come, particularly that US-China tension. And so as a first question, if you could share your thoughts on where you see those tensions going, and is this peace dividend we've had in the last post-war environment over, and do asset allocators like me have to sort of rethink the way we're doing a lot of our stuff?
Thank you, Anthony, for the question. I think we have passed the high point of globalization, where risk could be commoditized, and we could allocate assets just by looking at numbers on a dashboard with the help of AI. I think we're going back to an earlier phase where risk requires you to assess people as human beings. I remember Swan Aoyang once wrote a book about his father and how the father would go down as a banker, meeting clients, and watching the way they live, spend money, and then deciding, is he trustworthy? Robert Kwok described in his book how when he first met the chairman of Bangkok Bank, he wanted to call on the chairman. The chairman said, no, let me visit you. Not out of courtesy, because he wanted to see his office and to see how he ran his business, and therefore to assess whether that person is safe to lend to. Then you had, I think, was it Walter Reed in Citibank, who created a back room. Suddenly, everything was reduced to numbers. Then we have this incredible Anglo-Saxon financial world where you could have alphas and betas and Black-Scholes and so on, and sit before a dashboard, you play, and you optimize. I think that world is breaking down because it's becoming a multipolar world. That world will not apply in China, will not apply in continental Europe, will not apply in Africa, will not apply in India. And we have got to be used to operating in multiple systems. By the time it appears on your dashboard, it may be too late. So go back to the basics, which is looking at things for yourself, sensing people, and using almost animal instincts to decide who can be trusted, who is sensible, who is not. Yeah.
So let me ask you, in your work, the way I think you describe how particularly the US really doesn't understand China, it really stands out to me. And likewise, I'm an American, and when I go back to the US, I feel like my friends and colleagues there really have very limited understanding of China. But when I read comments from the leadership of the US, so this would be global security leaders from the White House and the Senate and the military, when they're asked the odds of a direct military being in conflict with China in the next 5 years, they all put the probability close to 100%. So what does the US get wrong about China, and how would you advise them to think about China?
The US political system is decentralized. and because of the need to win votes, it goes through emotional phases. And it's entering such a phase now where China is demonized out of mass emotion. There's some manipulation behind the scenes, but it's not based on knowledge. You ask those who are anti-China, where's Luoyang? Where's Singapore? They won't be able to tell you, but they have strong emotions. They know everything about Tibet, they know everything about Xinjiang. But really? So it's not sustainable, and they don't understand the nature of China. Why is China always building walls around itself? Every dynasty rebuilds the Great Wall. And even today, capital markets, Hollywood movies, COVID, China is constantly building walls around itself because it is happy in its own homogeneity. It has a very different nature from America. But the Americans think that China wants to displace them as top dog in the world. And because of that, it's trying to contain China, even pull it down, if possible. And my fear is it may exhaust itself in the process, and I don't think it will succeed. You take this latest move to impose 100% tax on EVs. I mean, the Qing dynasty did that right in the 19th century. And the result was the world passed it by, and within a few decades, its position plummeted in the world. That's the danger of shutting out the world. The Europeans can't do it, not the Germans, so they said, no, we will rise to the challenge of China. And whether it's Mercedes-Benz or BMW, these are very solid organizations, and I think they will put up a stiff resistance and in some ways will remain better than the Chinese. But if you say, no, hide behind the walls, 100% tariff, you become very weak. But this is the phase Americans are going through. But I fear that on multiple fronts now, they are facing very difficult challenges. You look at Ukraine. I mean, last few days, last 1 week, the Russians are moving across on a broad front. And they're finding that there are no fortifications. Apparently the money went somewhere else. The Russians are just walking across. So the people are happy for evacuating. But those who are Russians, who prefer to be in Russia, they are staying. Kyiv, Sumy will be threatened. But I suspect that an important objective for Russia is Odessa. So the Ukrainians are now in a dilemma. They don't have enough people, they lack equipment. But for the Western countries, this is alarming. Because in the last 2 or 3 years, everything to defeat Russia. And Russia is not defeated. And the back pressure will affect politics in America, in Germany, in France, everywhere in Europe. And then you have Gaza, which has really created a huge problem for Israel and for America. I mean, the Israelis believe that this is existential, that as Jews, they have to fight for themselves, and they think that force will solve the problem. And they have enough influence in America to ensure America's support. But this has created a deep split in America between old and young. So TikTok, X, in fact, feed anti-Israeli feelings among young Americans. And this worries them. And that's one reason why they want to shut down TikTok, not just because of China. You know, when I was foreign minister, a Chinese diplomat joked to one of my colleagues. He said, every time we face too much pressure from America, someone from the Middle East will save us. So now America hasn't got the bandwidth to have another front in Asia. So they want to stabilize the situation in Asia. And Blinken was in Beijing recently, I think partly to settle what Lai Ching-te will say in his inaugural speech a week from now in Taipei. I don't see the Taiwan front heating up because America doesn't want the front to open up. In fact, I was told by Zhu Lilun, chairman of KMT, that immediately after the elections, Steve Hadley and Jim Steinberg, they've retired but still connected, flew to Taipei to meet Lexington, Julie Lund, and Kerwin Tse with a simple message: no independence, and flew home. So the Taiwanese know that there's a limit to what they can do. So in the short term, I don't see a problem. In the longer term, yes, there's great concern in the US. Jim Snyder talked about small yard, high walls. But no one has the last move, because you have small yard, high wall. China will also have a yard with high walls. And then eventually, the whole pitch will be divided. So there'll be tough negotiations. And we have to factor in the likelihood now that Trump will be the next president. I think with the Gaza war, with Ukraine, it's very difficult for Biden to be reelected. We don't know, because it's still some months away, and some months can be a long time in politics. But we have to work with the possibility, even the probability that Trump will be president, and what does it mean for us, East Asia, Southeast Asia, for Ukraine, for Israel. What does it mean? And think through it deeply and work through the ramifications, because this may well happen. And you can be sure that all governments are working on that possibility right now, including in Singapore.
I had a question about the possibilities of a Trump or a Biden administration coming up. And in particular, I've seen it said that Trump was primarily focused on tariffs and trade, where Biden's a bit more focused on his concern of these empire building by Russia, and sort of, I think, somewhat view that China might have territorial ambitions as well. And so between these two leaders, how do you see things, I guess, for the rest of the world and for these US-China tensions?
Well, the Democrats are more globalists. I mean, they express American exceptionalism. They feel that America should be dominant everywhere, and its values should prevail everywhere. I don't think they can succeed. Trump is more isolationist. He tells NATO partners, if you don't cough up, it's like your insurance. If you don't pay your premium, the policy is canceled. NATO won't defend you. I mean, people are in shock when he talks like that. But does it make sense? In a way, he does. Because if I'm an ordinary American, who's paying for all this? Well, if you can print the US dollar, that's okay. But one day, you cannot just print dollar like that, and it'll be a choice between guns and butter. So my money goes to guns or for my butter. There's no question how they will vote. So the key event will be when the primacy of the US dollar breaks. We all know you have to break sometime or other because it's abnormal. If it's 30 years from now, well, let's drink and be merry. But if it's 5 years, well, we've got to calculate, right? Do we know when the cookie will crumble? We don't know. But the way the US is moving is bringing forward that date. I mean, they try to control countries by sanctions. And if you are subject to sanctions, it's no joke. I mean, I have Hong Kong friends. One of them is quite senior in the administration. They say, no, I'm completely beholden to my wife. I can't have a credit card, I don't have a bank account. All my assets are with her, I better be nice to her. So if you're under sanctions, it's no joke. So when they threaten the ICC, you put out an arrest warrant on Netanyahu, will go after you and your family members. A number of US senators have signed that. So of course the ICC has to stand up to it. But I'm quite sure privately, they will say, this is a serious matter. Not just me, but also my entire family. Then how do I operate? But how long can you pursue this cause? So last night, yesterday, India signed an agreement with Iran to open up a new corridor from Chabahar to the Caspian to Central Asia. Now, Chabahar was used by the Indians to supply the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. With US support, they closed one eye. But now the US has moved out from Afghanistan. India is left without a capability in inner Asia. So strategically, they need access. And the US said, we will sanction you. I don't think the US can afford to sanction India because they wanted India to side with them against China. The Indians know it. The Indians are playing a very clever game. They say, well, we are buying arms from Russia. We are selling arms to Russia. We'll have access to Iran. And do your worst. I don't think the US will dare to do its worst. And everywhere now, the US will find countries standing up to them. So you can no longer contain Iran. You can't contain North Korea with Russia as a member of the Security Council refusing to vote to continue the surveillance facility on North Korea. So this is the kind of situation we're entering. And it's a bit strange. Last night, I do not know whether you read your report this morning. Blinken was in Kiev. And he went to an underground bar, literally underground bar, to strum the guitar and sing Neil Young's Living the Free World. And it's all over the internet now. Why did he do that? There's war going on around him, I thought it's very strange. Something is happening. So we better be very alert. We're entering a great transition. US-China is part of it. India is part of it. Middle East is part of it. Ukraine and Gaza are certainly a part of it. And one way or another, it will affect us in Southeast Asia. I think we just keep ASEAN united, gives us a lot of buffer. Then however stormy the weather is, however choppy the waters become, if we are rafted together in ASEAN, we can bob up and down and keep dry. But we're entering interesting times.
I had a question about Asia. Today's event at UOB, we're focusing on a lot of the opportunities in Asia. And I think with these geopolitical tensions, Asia has been able to have a nice balancing act, be somewhat neutral between US and China, but I suspect that's going to be increasingly difficult. And especially in a world where maybe technology is going to be split between US chips and China chips. How do you see Asia playing a role in all this, and will it be able to maintain this balancing act going forward?
No, in the end, we go back to basics. Our children were brought up. Our families intact. Are they studying? Are they acquiring knowledge? Are they saving? Are they lazy? Go back to basics. Governments grow out of culture. There's information warfare against China. Yes, China faces a lot of problems. They punctured the real estate sector, and it take them years to sort it out, but they put a bottom to it because it's on everybody's balance sheet and they can't afford for it to implode. I think the real estate sector in China has bottomed out. There'll still be scares here and there, but by and large it's bottomed out. But it will not go back to the go-go years of the past, not for many years, if ever. Is China in trouble? I don't think so. Look at the factories, look at the EVs, look at how terrified the Europeans are, accusing China of having overcapacity. How can you blame China for overcapacity when you're taking liberties with yourself, having long summers and working short hours? And you say, no, you are working too hard. There are consequences. And if families take liberties with their children or with themselves, there are consequences. So if you look at Asia, look at China, look at Southeast Asia, look at India. There are people who are hardworking, who obsess over their children, who want to have of them a higher education, who will scream in order that their kids will have a better education, better health, a better life. In the end, the governments will sort themselves out, and they'll do well. And we're lucky to be in the part of the world where strange values have not taken over societies. I mean, let's ask ourselves, 19th century, Qing Dynasty China, the opium problem. I mean, of course, it is the evil of the West, selling opium to China. But why was there a market? Why was there a market that insisted on opium to drown pain and suffering? Why is America such a big market for drugs today? And I was watching the Eurovision contest in clips of it. I mean, the big issue was how the Israeli contestant was being booed and so on. It was very unfair to her, but I mean, that's politics. But parts of it, almost satanic. But it's not part of the fashion, the morals of Europe. What is happening? PM Lee talked about how we should keep all these woke things away from us as much as possible. I fully agree with him. Keep our societies wholesome. Keep our families intact. I mean, AI is very important, but AI cannot answer moral questions for us. In the end, it's every individual, every child who must make the choice. Be immersed in technology, make use of it, but have our own sense of what it means to be a human being. So if we use that as a template to judge human society, I say we are very lucky to be in a part of the world where societies, by and large, are wholesome and will do well. But of course, if there's war, then everything gets upset. So there must be an overriding desire and mission to keep the peace in the region, to keep conflicts within bounds.
So, we're at the minute mark where I'm supposed to remind everyone to go ahead and put in questions into Slido, and I can pass them on. But there was one more set question that I wanted to make sure to get to. And this is for Singapore. Today is a big day. It's the changeover of the Prime Minister. And so you've worked with Prime Minister Lee, and you know his style and his way of doing things. How do you see things changing? How do you see a difference in style and difference in way things might be done going forward under Prime Minister Wong?
I'm really impressed by UOB's inside information. It is as well done as it could be. But with any succession, you can do all your best. Then the roulette wheel turns again. So you cannot future-proof. You cannot guarantee outcomes. And our little boat is moving into very choppy waters. The key is our internal unity, because if we maintain strong internal cohesion, then I think we'll be able to navigate. Because with our reserves, we have large ballast. And if we rough ourselves to the regional economies, I think we'll stay afloat quite nicely. And even find opportunities when the waters become turbulent. Yeah. And whoever governs Singapore knows that we are price takers in the world. We can't change the world. We can't change India or China or US-China relations. But we can decide how we are positioned and how the region is shaped. In the region, we have some influence. So let us work on that. But the key is our own internal cohesion, that within Singapore, we feel for one another. That the wealthy, it's a bit unjust because of liquidity. The wealthy have become very wealthy. And in many societies, the Gini coefficient has worsened. And it is easy within a short distance to live in your own world and to forget how others are living. It's very important that if you are blessed, bless others. Then our society will cohere. But if we, in a little bubble, think that we are here because we are more intelligent, we are more gifted, and therefore we deserve this bubble. And if you are outside, you deserve it because you are what you are. Then our society will break up. Then when the storm comes, instead of us being focused, we'll be quarreling among ourselves, then we'll take in water. To me, that is the greatest challenge, and it is a political challenge. It's a political challenge for the PAP, for Lawrence Wong, how in a rapidly changing world, with all societies facing the impact of globalization, of ceaseless technological change, how we still stick together. And it's not just Singapore as a whole. It's within communities, within families, and in ourselves. How do we respond? And we know that when new technologies appear, some respond faster, more capably than others. Some families will do very well and float to the top. Others are stuck. Even between ethnic groups, there'll be a divergence in responses. Even between religious groups, there'll be a divergence in response. And therefore, there'll be new tensions. And these new tensions have got to be attended to, addressed, so that we stick together. We're a heterogeneous society, and we have many foreigners in Singapore. And every time a new technology, AI comes along, some will quickly exploit it and be ahead, others will slide down the league table. But if those who move up don't look after those who are left behind, we'll be in trouble. So that, perhaps, is our single greatest challenge. And that, at the core of it, is a moral challenge. Are we one family, or are we divided?
So, Mr. Yeo, I see people are submitting questions. Thank you very much. And you can vote them. And I see some of the ones that have been upvoted the most. So let me start with this one. I think it was on our minds too. We're based here in ASEAN, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the future of ASEAN. But the question, I think is a good one to put to you. It's just how do you see the future of ASEAN and ASEAN leadership? I would add from investor point of view, we focus a lot on we see businesses around the world trying to diversify trade, and ASEAN frequently being a beneficiary of this. On the other hand, ASEAN has a lot of differences, and I imagine balancing this going forward is also a challenge. So I guess just generally this question is, how do you see the bloc of ASEAN? Is it getting stronger or is it challenging?
I think ASEAN will be okay. ASEAN is not held together by love. It is held together by fear. Because even if you're Indonesia, you know that others are much bigger. And if we don't stick together, we'll be balkanized. And instead of becoming neighbors, we become clients of big powers. Instead of using them, they make use of us. That's always the threat. Look at the Philippines now. The Philippines have legitimate disputes with China. Both sides have their cases. The Americans see an opportunity there and jump in. They bring in the Japanese. And now Philippine politics is caught up in this. Can an accident happen? Yes. Will it lead to war? I doubt it. Because in the end, interests will assert themselves. And the business community in the Philippines, which has a strong Chinese component, they don't like what they're seeing. And below the emotions, the Filipinos know that in the end they need economic development. And to some extent, if the Americans are somewhere, they strengthen their negotiating position with China. So China must manage this skillfully, understanding the domestic politics, understanding that deep inside, the Filipinos are pro-American. I remember when the Filipinos asked the Americans to leave Clark and Subic base. They said, GI, go home, but bring me along with you. So this is the Philippines as it is. So China must work with it and find a way to save face. I mean, they had an agreement, a gentleman's agreement with Duterte, which Marcos has repudiated. So, okay, so they must find a new way to equilibrate and make use of the Americans and not be made use of by the Americans. But that's very difficult. When you try to make use of a big power, you end up being made use of by them. So Singapore has learned that lesson. We are very careful. Then look at Vietnam. Vietnam has made a very important decision to go with China. It was not well reported, but Vietnam has agreed that Hanoi will be linked to Kunming and Nanning by high-speed rail. This is big, because each connection is tens of billions of dollars and will change the topological configuration of logistics and supply chain and human movement for decades to come. The Vietnamese held back this decision for a long time, but they're cracking down on corruption. China is now an inspiration to the General Secretary, but he's having one hell of a fight in Vietnam. But I think in the end, they have no choice. Because if the Communist Party is termite-ridden, there's no hope for Vietnam. They know it. And they didn't fight the French and Americans for nothing. And just this month, just maybe today, I think, they are celebrating the 70th anniversary of their victory over the French in Dien Bien Phu. Generations died to secure the independence. They are not going to throw it all away by allowing corrupt officials to take over the country. And they're watching China and the way it's going. So they will take that same route. Indonesia, Prabowo, first visit to China. People scratch their heads. Why did he do that? And when he met Xi Jinping, it was Xiao Ti talking to Taka, little brother talking to big brother. But when he went to Japan, then it's brother talking to brother. But don't be mistaken, because Southeast Asians have seen China in early incarnations. They know the Chinese like all these things. So when they go to China, they will bow and they will scrape and so on. But it doesn't mean that they are servile inside. And if interests are involved, they will assert themselves, as we see in the Philippines. But it's part of Li, it's part of the ritual of relations with China. And you look at the other countries, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Brunei. No one wants China to be an enemy. And the Americans don't understand this yet. That because China is getting bigger and bigger for us, all of us want the Americans to be in the room. But if the Americans say, no, you have to choose between China and us, then we say, no, we can't. How can we choose? I mean, China is where our side of the bread is buttered, But if they don't ask us to choose, then every door, every window is open to the Americans. And they will not have to pay a cent. I think eventually they will come to this realization. The Europeans and Japanese already know it. But it will take time. And this is a transition that unfortunately we have to go through.
And actually, that point is a good one, because the next question that we have from the audience is about President Xi's visit to Europe. And I think it ties into the point you were making also about Ukraine. So for Europe, as you mentioned, that economic relationship with China is very important. At the same time, Europe is very sensitive about that Ukraine issue and China's alliance with Russia. How do you see this trip to Europe going, and what do you see that relationship going?
It was Xi Jinping's first visit to Europe after COVID, and I followed closely his visit to France, to Serbia, and to Hungary. He was given exceptional welcome in all three countries. And because Xi Jinping, when Macron visited China, accompanied him in Guangzhou and talked about his father and what he did in the special economic zone. So this time around, when he went to France, Macron brought him to the Pyrenees, to a little town where Macron used to visit his mother or grandmother, I can't remember, to show an equivalent hospitality. Very dignified, very, very warm. And the French have vast interest in China. Xi Jinping did it for other Europeans to watch. So the Germans will want the same, and German economic interests, business interests, will want the same. The Italians pull out from One Belt, One Road under American pressure, but bilaterally, they are warming up their relations with China. China's strategy is to build up Europe as a separate pole, to build up the euro as a separate reserve currency in order to have more room in managing their relations with the US. But they know that whatever happens, Europe will always be closer to America than they will be to China because of deep civilizational relations. But some distance between Europe and America is good for China. And if Europe plays this skillfully, Europe can prevent either America or China from being excessive in their behavior. Because if China pushes too much, all Europe needs to do is to shift a bit of weight to America, and China will have to behave. If America pushes too much, they only need to shift a bit of weight to China, and America will have to behave. It's like Tai Chi. Unfortunately, the Europeans are not yet good in Tai Chi because the European Union is not a centralized organization. They're divided. And there are no strong leaders today. Macron is probably the strongest, but he's his last term, and French society is fractured. All European societies are fractured. But maybe in time, enough thinkers in Europe will come to the conclusion that they can keep the peace in the world by being more balanced. But this will require first for there to be a ceasefire and some kind of a peace settlement in Ukraine. Because for as long as Ukraine is a raging source of infection, Europe cannot play this balancing role. So it may take another 10, 20 years. And we've got to navigate through this phase.
So, Mr. Yeo, I have another question, and it kind of ties to the theme of our event today. And the question is simply, do you feel that Asia's position as an engine of global growth is diminishing? And to give some context, as an investor, I see lots of opportunities in Asia, lots of businesses that are forming that excite me. But as markets, the Asian markets have underperformed for a considerable period of time. And I do get that feedback from clients that, they're losing confidence in Asia. So the question was just simply, do you see that engine of growth changing and becoming less strong for Asia? How do you think about that engine of growth for Asia?
Oh, I think that's a very sadly mistaken view. I mean, China accounts for a third of global growth. Asia will account for maybe a half of global growth, and it will account for more and more in the coming years. Markets will take time to respond, and partly because of decoupling, and the US telling the funds to downweight China funds. They're playing up India. But India has its own rhythm, and India will take time to develop. It's still early days for India. But the developed markets, the more mature markets will be China and Southeast Asia. And I would not be underweight on them. And if they're oversold now, that becomes an opportunity. But I think it's a very wrong view of the world and ignores basics and fundamentals.